Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share true trucker horror stories. First story. I'm a trucker and encountered something terrifying on the road. My name is Richard. I'm a truck driver bringing goods across country and back for a decently good paycheck, but I doubt I'd be returning to that line of work anytime soon. My father was a trucker when I was young. He always told me it was a good job. You're out on the road with the fresh air. You're your own boss. The pay's good. I thought it sounded great, so I wanted to take up trucking and delivering stuff when I got older. When I graduated high school, I did everything I needed, passed the tests and everything, and soon enough I was out on the road. It was amazing for a year or two. I made good money, and it was nice to be on the road and even have my own little room basically in my truck. But there's a reason I said was, though, I doubt I'm ever driving another truck again after what happened to me one winter night. It was around 2 in the morning when it happened. I was driving down the nearly empty highway with the occasional car passing by when I saw what I thought looked like a giant skinny creature running through the trees in the woods to the right of my truck. I thought nothing of it because I was extremely tired after having driven a lot the past few days and shrugged it off as my mind messing around with me. An hour later, around 3, there were no more cars, just me on the highway driving down. Moments later, I saw the same figure running through the trees again, and I started questioning if it was really in my head at this point. My thoughts were interrupted as a long, slender hand reached out of the trees in front of me, slamming into the front of my truck, stopping my truck immediately. The hand had long, blood-stained claws, and I saw another hand creep over the barrier of the highway as a pair of dead eyes stared through the trees. I attempted to get out the car, but the creature flipped the truck over on its side, causing me to slam my head into the dash and go unconscious. My eyes opened a few moments later to see a giant creature coming out of the forest and climbing over the barrier. It was a very skinny, pale, white creature with extremely long and skinny limbs. I desperately tried to open the door and get out onto the truck's side, but I passed out again. When I woke in the hospital, they told me I was found a few feet away from my truck laying on the highway with a bad head injury. Obviously, when I told them about what I saw, they brushed it off with excuses like it was all in your head or your truck hit something and flipped. I didn't believe a word they said, though. I know what I saw. I'm currently sitting in a hospital bed typing this, and I'm still mortified of what I saw on that road in the darkness. My truck was totaled in there. Were no signs of anyone or anything near the accident site. I plan to quit my job as a trucker and move on to something else, but I'm horrified of what could happen if I were to drive again. I just won't ever feel safe on the road again after what I encountered. What do I do? Second story. I'm a long-haul trucker. What I saw one night still haunts me. This story happened 5 years ago, but it still freaks me out to this day. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've been doing it for most of my adult life. I love the freedom it provides. Out on the open road, not stuck behind a desk wearing a suit and tie. I would hate that. I prefer being by myself and getting to travel to new places. Anyway, on the night this incident took place, I had just stopped for the night across from a little diner right outside of middle of nowhere, Nevada. I figured I would grab a bite to eat before getting some sleep for the night. The diner was pretty empty, except for a guy leaning over what looked like a cup of coffee in the far corner and a young couple in one of the booths. I grabbed a seat at the counter, setting my hat down in front of me. An older woman with permed red hair and thick Coke bottle glasses approached me from behind the counter. She was holding a pot of coffee in one hand, while the other hand was resting on her hip in an "I'm too old and too tired to be doing this" expression. "What can I get ya?" she asked in a very unenthusiastic tone. I'll take a club sandwich, please, and a water." The overworked and underpaid waitress nodded, and then headed over to the couple in the booth. The young woman was laughing her head off at something the guy had said. I turned my attention to the small TV with the antennae situated on top like a pair of rabbit ears. It was late-night news, and the reporter was covering a story most people had probably already read about online a few hours ago. Something about a missing prisoner, yikes. I had never thought much about the dangers of sleeping on the road until that very moment. I mean, I obviously always lock my doors and try to park in a well-lit area, if there was one, but other than that, I had never really considered the inherent risks of sleeping in usually sketchy areas with just my flashlight for protection. I know truck drivers are usually thought of as big, burly, intimidating men, but I'm a normal height, average build guy just looking to do my job. I picked up one of the little creamer cups out of the dish on the counter and started rolling it over in my fingers. The handsome reporter on the TV had handed things off to the even better-looking blonde woman giving the winning lotto numbers. The door to the kitchen swung open, and the waitress emerged with my food and drink balanced on one of those circular black trays. Thank God. I was starving. I hadn't eaten since early that morning, and that was just half of a Pop-Tart. Thank you, I said as she set the plate in front of me. She muttered as she disappeared back into the kitchen. I had just taken a bite out of my sandwich when the lights overhead started to flicker. There was a faint buzzing noise that went along with it, like an overloaded wire. Well, that wasn't too surprising. This diner looked like it hadn't been upgraded since the 50s, with the ripped upholstery in most of the seats and the faded blue paint on the walls. It wouldn't be surprising to learn that this building's electricity still ran off vacuum tubes. I continued eating, not really caring why the lights continued their occasional strobing. I had begun to pull out the small, thin book of crosswords I carried around in the front pocket of my denim jacket when I heard the sound of the door opening and closing behind me. Two large men dressed in black suits entered the diner, both looking around before pointing in the direction of the man sitting by himself in the corner. I continued watching them as I ate. The man at the table was wearing a sweatshirt with the hood pulled over his head, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him, like a man deep in prayer. It was hard to make out his expression because his face was obscured not only by the hood, but also from the long dark hair sweeping across the bridge of his nose, past his chin. I swallowed, then took a sip of water as I watched the men in suits sit across from the hooded man. One of the suit guys was pointing a finger at the man and then pointing the same finger up towards the ceiling. The hooded man continued sitting there, not moving a muscle. I finished off the rest of my food and finished off the water in a tidy little gulp before standing up and fishing my wallet out of my back pocket. I peeled a $10 bill off of the large bundle of ones and laid it on the counter. It was right as I had put my hat back on and turned to leave that the lights went out again. Only this time, they stayed out. That's about the same time that the waitress came crashing through the swinging door from the kitchen, screaming at the top of her lungs that she couldn't see. At first I thought that she was having a very dramatic reaction to the lights being out, but then I realized she actually meant something far worse. Blood was running from underneath those thick black glasses onto the grease-stained apron which hung from her neck. "Oh my God, help me! Help me!" she screamed, running like a chicken with its head cut off. I was just about to lunge over the counter to help her when another scream shouted out from my right. This one was the young man that was sitting with his girlfriend. Only he wasn't the one who was hurt. His girlfriend had collapsed onto the floor, violently convulsing on the ground as she started to foam at the mouth. "Holy shit, somebody call 911, the young man shouted. He was kneeling next to the girl, cradling her head in his arms. "Oh my God! Shit, shit, shit!" I shouted as I sprinted through the front door of the diner. As I was running, I noticed the man that had been sitting in the corner. His hood was off, and he was standing now as the two suited men lay by his feet. There was something horribly wrong about his face, but I couldn't tell exactly what it was in my hurry to get to my truck. My phone was in there, and I needed it if there was any hope of getting these people help. I ran across the silent, empty street and then slammed into my driver's side door. I frantically moved all of my papers and empty wrappers around before finding my phone next to the seat. I dialed 911 and looked back across the street at the diner. My mouth dropped open as the dispatcher's voice said, "Hello? Hello?" into my ear. The small building was completely engulfed in flames. Smoke was rising up into the night sky, obscuring the view of the stars. Against the backdrop of that orange fireball was the figure of a man slowly walking towards me. I threw the phone into the truck and climbed into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and looked through the windshield. The man was gone. I pulled my keys out of my pocket with trembling hands and started the engine. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and turned onto the road. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still, watching my truck as I drove away. Only this time, I could actually see his face, and that is what still gives me nightmares to this day. His face was illuminated by the fire, and I could see that the skin was pale white, paler than snow, and the eyes were even whiter than that. There were no eyebrows, and the lips were turned upwards into an awful sneer, exposing the rows of long yellow teeth within its mouth. I escaped that day, but I know he is still out there. IT is still out there, and it may be coming for you next. Third story. On the Russian ice road, you always help your fellow travelers. When people hear my wife's Russian, they imagine a tall, blonde girl with a funny accent who wears heels for every grocery run. Reality couldn't be farther from the stereotype. Lana is dark-haired, speaks better English than I do, and is completely obsessed with sneakers. She does meet one stereotype, though she never gets cold, seeing how she lived in Russia until she was 18. Not in Moscow, of course. Did you know that Moscow is actually pretty warm? There are entire states in America where winters are far colder than anything Muscovites ever have to deal with. No, my wife comes from a tiny town far up Russian north, on the tundra. A dark, gloomy, and a very cold place inside the Arctic Circle, with extremely harsh winters and even harsher people. A place that meets the stereotypes. I've met my in-laws all of 2 times, including our wedding, both times as they traveled to the States. Frankly, I never had any intention of visiting my Lana's hometown until she got that fateful call 9 days ago. My mother-in-law had had a stroke. While her condition was stable for the time being, the local doctor expected the worst could happen at any minute. Transporting her to a better hospital was out of question, as she was in no state for the kind of a journey that you'll see described below. My wife made travel arrangements immediately. I had a valid Russian visa from a business trip to Moscow a few weeks prior, so I decided to go with her. Now, getting to my wife's hometown isn't easy. You're in for a flight to Moscow, then a connecting flight to Norilsk, one of the biggest cities in the Russian tundra. From there, it's an hour-long trip down the Yenisei River, by barge in summer and on cars over ice in the winter. Urgently getting to Moscow wasn't that hard. There, however, we faced additional difficulties. First of all, apparently I couldn't actually fly to Norilsk with Lana, as the city was closed to foreigners. Before we could even process that, we were told that Norilsk Airport was closed for all aircraft due to poor weather conditions, and the weather wasn't expected to improve that week. I tried to console Lana as best as I could, but news of her mom getting worse drove her crazy. Soon, Lana suggested an alternative, it was possible to fly to a city a fair bit south of Norilsk, which was safe from the storms. For a modest fee, a family friend living there was willing to take a day's journey up the ice road to Lana's hometown. Well, more like a night's journey, since according to him, it was better to travel at night by cars' lights than by what passed as daylight. I told my wife she was insane. She, however, was adamant on her plan, saying she's done Zimnik, how Russians call their ice roads, many times with her dad, and it was perfectly safe. She wouldn't budge no matter how I pleaded, and told me I was welcome to stay in Moscow. Obviously, that was not an option, and in the end I gave up. We flew to our next destination, and the cold hit me as soon as I stepped out of the plane. It was a different kind of cold, invasive and ruthless, and it didn't care about layers of sweaters and socks I had on. I shivered imagining how much colder it was going to get. We met with the trucker who was to take us up north. He called himself Kolya, and my wife, Sveta, the Russian version of her name. Me, he didn't call at all, instead referring to me derisively as Mr. Amerikashka whenever he spoke to my wife. Lana told me with a chuckle she didn't tell Kolya I could understand Russian, although I don't think he would have cared. Kolya was supposed to be a few years younger than my wife, but looked much older, his skin and posture worn down by the harsh conditions of his homeland. He laughed at our American shoes and coats and said he would pack extra jackets, woolen socks, and Valinki for us, just in case. His brother helped load his truck, which looked like it had seen the fall of the Soviet Union. And then Kolya sat down to enjoy a shot of vodka. One for the road. My wife saw me blanch at that. "This isn't New York or even Moscow," she said quietly. "People here are a bit behind in terms of DUI. Don't worry, he won't drink enough to get impaired. He's seen that kill people on the road." Well, indeed, the first shot was the last, and Kolya hopped into the truck. He offered my wife the shotgun seat, which, as far as I understood Russian macho culture, was basically equivalent of throwing a glove in my face. Whatever, as long as he got us there. The road was a dark stretch of ice and packed snow-powdered by the fresh snow that had fallen that morning. Snowdrifts bordered both sides of the roads and leaked onto its surface a fair bit. Otherwise, it was the same barren flat surface for miles. In the first couple of hours, we saw a few cars going the opposite way to us. Then a car going in the same direction as us overtook us and disappeared in the darkness ahead at surprising speeds. It was a freaking tiny, rusted-through Subaru. I gave up on understanding Russians then and there. Shortly after the Subaru guy, it started snowing. Just a bit at first, then more and more. Kolya didn't seem bothered, and I tried to stay calm as well, which I managed mostly successfully until the wind joined in. Unlike the snow, it started hard from the get-go. Have you ever heard wind howling and become unsettled by the sound? Now imagine the same, but in the depths of a black night lit only by your car's headlights. Except for your own vehicle, the world around is silent and devoid of life, frozen until the spring. Not that you can see much through the thick snow that is now the wind's plaything, flurrying around the car, blanketing the windows. Our pace slowed to a crawl as Kolya swore colorfully in Russian. "Maybe stop and wait it out?" I suggested nervously. "We can't," Lana said without bothering to ask our driver. "If we stop, there's a good chance the car won't start up again, and we are stuck here waiting for someone to pick us up. And it's been empty today." The realization we were at a very real risk of freezing to death hit me like a ton of bricks. I leaned back into my seat and closed my eyes, wordlessly praying for the best. The only response was the wind howling, and it sounded so strange. It would start low and quiet and then get louder and louder until a yowling crescendo, then cut off abruptly, then start again, and the sound came from different directions, each starting at a different time, like a pack of wolves howling. I opened my eyes to obvious tension in the car. Lana and Kolya were both hunched forward, peering intently through the glass for all the good it did them. Kolya glanced back at me. "Don't worry, be happy," Kolya proclaimed with a horrible Russian accent. "It is all okay. Don't worry, America." He was lying. I might have been useless on the ice road, but I was a criminal defense lawyer, and a good one at that. And Kolya was a bad liar. There was sweat beading on his face and neck, and his voice was forced. He was very much scared, and that made me scared too. Kolya murmured something to my wife, too quick and quiet for my distracted mind to decipher. She nodded. "What was that?" "There's a village maybe half an hour up the road, if we keep this pace. We get there and settle down until the morning." "I see. Sorry about the delay." In reality, I was extremely happy to hear that. "Bad wind, huh?" Lana grabbed my hand, quick and sudden as a snake. "Don't mention the wind." Another sound came through the storm, a long, tinny wail that sent shivers down my spine. It took me a few moments to recognize the familiar sound of the wind whistling through walls and chimney. And then another moment to realize there were no fucking walls around for the wind to whistle. I opened my mouth to comment, and my wife's grip tightened on my arm. In that moment, I knew to keep it quiet. We drove in tension-filled silence as a cacophony of sounds erupted through the storm. Wails and shrieks, howls and cries. No way no fucking wind was producing all of that. The sounds grew closer, grew louder. I grabbed my wife's hands as we both stared desperately ahead. Through the flurry, we barely made out something, a large, dark shape reflecting our lights, or maybe piercing the darkness with lights of its own. Kolya swore and swerved to the side. We were passing another car stuck in the snow. Its blinkers flashed. "Stop," Lana said, sudden and harsh. "What?" Kolya asked in Russian. "You insane?" "Stop," my wife repeated. "On the ice road, you help. That's the rule, remember?" Kolya gave her a long, hard look that I didn't like at all. "That's the rule on the road," he echoed, and hit the brakes, slowing the car without actually stopping. I opened the door and peered outside. The driver of the stuck vehicle was already running towards us. I recognized the car itself as the Subaru that passed us earlier. "Thank God you people were," the driver began. "Get in, idiot," Kolya shouted, and the guy shut up and jumped in. He was just a kid no older than 20, with dark red hair and a patchy little beard. He looked cold and terrified. "Thank God," he repeated in a hushed whisper. "I was sure they'd get me." "They?" I asked, confused. Kolya and Lana turned to look at the kid in unison, and their looks could kill. Yeah, I mean the wind and snow," the kid corrected quickly. I had a sudden abrupt feeling that it was too late for that, even as I still had no clue what was going on. We drove on, and the interplay of howls and shrieks outside the car became unbearable in the silence. "What's your name, dude?" I asked him in my best Russian. He blinked. Sergey Molchanov. "My parents are, anyway, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't have been driving, but I wanted to make it to my girlfriend's birthday, and..." "Both of you shut up," my wife barked, and we did. Immediately, I noticed the change in surrounding sounds. They were much louder now. The highest-pitched shrieks rang in my ears. The low, insistent howling seemed to surround the car. And every now and then, something that sounded like an actual roar cut through the night. The car picked up the pace. I looked at Kolya and realized he was absolutely flooring the gas pedal. Poor visibility be damned. His truck was lurching along as fast as it could manage in the conditions. And yet the encroaching racket made it obvious we were nowhere near fast enough. Then the car hit something. We were all jerked forward as the truck came to a staggering halt. I hit my temple hard on the back of my wife's seat. "What was that?" I groaned. "Must have hit a chunk of ice or something." Lana's voice sounded strangely muffled. I remember focusing on her lips and how pale and thin they looked. The dull, resounding pain in my head exploded into something hot and overwhelming, and I collapsed into the back seat. "He's passed out," Sergey called out. I wanted to correct him, but my voice wouldn't obey me. My lids seemed to weigh a ton each. I could barely open my eyes enough to see the trio of Russians huddled together, the car's flickering light illuminating their pale faces. "What now?" Sergey asked nervously. "Well, let's see. I don't think I would have been able to understand complex Russian in that state if it wasn't my Lana speaking, her voice so familiar down to every inflection. Why don't you go out and check what we hit and if we can clear it out somehow?" "What? We helped you, didn't we?" In the car's light, Lana's green eyes seemed very blue. "So, why don't you help us back? After all, on the ice road you help each other. That's the rule." Kolya grumbled in agreement. Then he reached over and pulled out a rifle and aimed it at the boy. Sergey whimpered. "You know they're out there?" "Well," Lana's voice was impeccably calm. "Cold. I guess you'd better not speak about them out loud, then. Better not even think about them, really." My eyes closed against my will. I heard a door swing open and a rush of cold air. Finally, I passed out for real, and in my unconsciousness I dreamed of horrified screaming and a single terrible roar that filled the night. I came to during the day on a couch of some local family that agreed to house us for a bit of cash. My wife fussed over me. Once she was sure I was conscious and lucid, she rushed me into the car, saying we could do the rest of the drive by day, and an actual doctor could look at me in her hometown. I settled in the back seat of the car. Vague memories haunted me. "Where's the kid?" "Sergey." "What kid, darling?" Lana asked in sincere surprise. "There was no kid. We traveled alone," Kolya added in Russian. And I wondered how he knew what I was asking about, or that I'd understand his answer. But aloud, I could only say, "This young, red-headed guy. Sweetie, I'm getting really worried. You must have hit your head harder than I thought. We got to get you checked out as soon as we get back to the States. Maybe even a good checkup in Moscow." I didn't really know what to say after that. We made it the rest of the way uneventfully. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law had slipped into unconsciousness before we even set out for our drive, and she passed away several hours after our arrival. Lana didn't even get to say a proper goodbye. She is absolutely devastated right now, so I'm trying my best to focus on comforting her. We're staying here until the funeral, and I can't stay. I'm looking forward to the ride back. My father-in-law graciously gifted me a proper Russian winter coat, so I went ahead and packed my American camel coat that proved terribly insufficient for the weather. As I was folding it, I noticed a few curly red hairs stuck to the light beige fabric, and I felt so cold. Fourth story. My family moved a lot. Now I know what we were running from. At first I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV. It was like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next we were in Salt Lake City. We didn't know much about our lives before this. We knew we were born in Portland and that we could never stop moving. We always knew we were a special family. I just guess we didn't know how special we were. My parents tried so hard to have kids and almost lost hope. That's why my twin sister and I were so special to them. They're little miracles. It was annoying, but at least we knew we meant something to them. Amelia and I were fairly close, as far as siblings go. We were kind of each other's only friends since we were homeschooled. We felt pretty isolated. We never set up camp anywhere fun. No KOA campgrounds with ice cream shops and swimming pools. Always driving off-road and living deep in the woods. I guess it was peaceful, in a way, but anyone who grew up near the woods understand it's not something you mess with. The first time I really personally realized something was up was just before our 7th birthday, when we were staying in a place in BC called Kamloops. We weren't supposed to sneak out or leave mom and dad's sight, but at the time, we were mischievous 6-year-olds, with a huge, unexplored forest in front of us. What do you expect? We waited until they fell asleep for the night and snuck out of the RV through the window, which was easy because the window was just a sheet of plastic held together by a zipper. And we set off with nothing but a shitty lantern to illuminate the path in front of us. It wasn't long before we saw something strange, a glow. Not from our lantern. It was coming from in front of us. It didn't take long for us to see who or what was in front of us. It was a lady holding a small, homemade torch, but she didn't look much like a lady. Her hair was matted and fallen out in some places. Her skin was almost blue and looked rotted. Her teeth were yellow and a few were missing, and I thought you could even see part of her jaw. She was wearing a dirty hospital gown. I didn't know where the nearest hospital was, but it had to be pretty damn far because the last time I remember driving anywhere with a paved road had to be 3 hours before we set up our camp here. Amelia and I were frozen in fear, and for the first time since we had mutually decided affection towards siblings was lame, I reached for her hand. That thing reached out its bony arm to us. It moaned something almost indecipherable, like "Mubaboo," that was enough to snap me out of it, and I sprinted away, dragging Amelia behind me. By some miracle, we had made it back to the RV, and, by some other miracle, got back in without waking our parents. We didn't get much sleep, and were far too shaken up to even say good morning to our parents, let alone tell them what happened. Would they have even believed us if we told them? Well, after what happened next, I guess they would have to. When we opened the door to the RV, we saw that the remains of what we had left out overnight, a campfire reduced to ashes, the sticks covered in charcoal Amelia and I had used to draw on the rocks, and a makeshift table with a few cans of beans, had been utterly destroyed. It wasn't too out of the ordinary to have our camp ravished by animals. We lived in the woods after all, but this was something no animal could do. This looked set up like whatever did it had a plan. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed this belief. In the charcoal sticks, someone had written, "You can't run forever on our trailer." Mom made us breakfast while Dad cleaned up the mess. We left shortly after that and drove for hours, not even stopping for quick washroom breaks. Mom and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad drove. I wish I knew what they had been talking about. That night, I guess because Mom and Dad could see we were shaken up, they took us for a rare treat. A dinner at a real restaurant. A shitty diner, but a restaurant nonetheless. It was empty there, which was why my parents liked it, as they hated crowds. I was over the moon. A root beer float and a greasy cheeseburger was anything a 6-year-old boy could dream of. Which was why I was so upset when Mom and Dad made us leave the second someone else came in. It was just an old trucker. I didn't get the big deal. While we were in the RV, Amelia asked why we had to leave while I sulked in my bunk, a glorified shelf. Mom sighed. "I suppose you two are almost 7. That's old enough to know." "Well, Zachary, Amelia, the reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you. Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I had no idea. My memory was never good, but Amelia claimed to remember. We were in Beaverton, not too far from Portland. She said that when we were 4, we were running around in a field when a big man in camouflage and bit boots came up to us and bent down to our level. We're not supposed to talk to strangers, Amelia said. She was always a goody two-shoes. I'm John. Now we're not strangers. What are your names? I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4 and our birthday is July 26th, 2002. I had apparently said, but I bet Amelia just said I said that to make me look worse. That's when he stopped smiling. He roughly took our hands and started to lead us away. Let's go somewhere fun, Zach and Amelia. I need to take you someplace else. My mom got teary. That's right. If your dad and I hadn't caught you just before you left, we probably would have never seen you again. I took you to someplace safe, and your dad dashed. I shot that son of a bitch. In the leg. Hope he had fun crawling back to his house. He said coldly. Amelia and I shot each other glances. Okay, Daddy. I'm going to go to sleep now, she said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere for the night. I forgot where, probably near the interior of BC, or maybe Alberta. I looked out the little plastic window, and I saw her. I saw that fucking lady again. She was staring at me and Amelia in our bunk beds, reaching out for us with that same long, bony hand. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but couldn't, knowing she was there. Life continued on like that for a while. Anywhere we'd stop, she'd be there. Washington? There she was. Nevada? You bet your ass. Montana? Better fucking believe it. Amelia and I didn't really explore much anymore. Partially because we were getting older and gradually showing less interest in that sort of thing, but partially because that experience in Kamloops traumatized us both. That didn't stop the lady from trying to get us. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of her on the highway as we drove by. Sometimes she'd appear right where the fire of our campsite stopped illuminating, so we could barely see her. On the rare occasion we went into public to get supplies or food, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of her in the crowd. Whenever she was around, I always heard that damn cry of hers. Mo boo boo. After a while, she stopped scaring me. Well, as much. Everything finally made sense the day before Amelia and I turned 14. Mom and Dad had left the RV and gave us a rare couple hours of freedom as they gathered things for our birthday. We weren't parked ridiculously far from civilization, but I'd say a good hour's worth of walking. We weren't that scared. We had lived in the woods long enough to know as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you, and the lady in the hospital gown was honestly more of an annoyance than anything else. I'd even go so far to say we had almost forgotten about her. I was reading, and Amelia was rummaging around the RV for food. I was getting immersed in my book when Amelia shouted out, "Zach, come check this out." I rolled my eyes. What could it be? We had lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew it like the back of my hand. There was absolutely no nook or cranny I didn't know about. Oh, I guess I was wrong. There, under the driver's seat cushion Amelia had pulled out for some reason, was a box. It was small and a bit squished from all the years of my dad's ass sitting on it, but we could still tell what it was. Amelia excitedly reached to open it. Inside were papers. Forget about it, Amelia. It's probably just boring documents for work. I said, but the look of confusion to horror on my sister's face was enough to change my mind. They were documents, but not for work. Birth documents. For us. But the stated parents weren't ours. I was apparently Zachary Jr., but nobody in my family was named Zachary. I looked at the father's name, Zachary. The mother was someone named Emily. Maybe we were adopted? I suggested. Amelia reached in and pulled out another sheet of paper. She shook her head and held out the next one for me with a shaky hand. Infants missing from Portland Hospital, July 27th, 2002. Twins, Zachary Christopher Clark Jr. and Amelia Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately. Clark? Christopher? Those weren't our names. Our last name was Brown, and our parents certainly weren't Zachary and Emily. They were Jenny and Kevin. I had a feeling things were going to get worse. I was right, as Amelia pulled out the third and second to last paper. Portland mother of 2 murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing, when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. We looked at the police drawing. It was obviously not a complete match, but they were basically the only other 2 faces we had seen our entire lives. Mom and Dad. CCTV footage shows the 2 suspects leaving the hospital through a back door with the 2 infants. Search is ongoing. If spotted, do not approach these individuals. Alert the authorities immediately. We were silent as Amelia shakily grabbed the last piece of paper. This was from 2006. We were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and was attacked by the perpetrators. A glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long cold case. Father and husband of the victims, Zachary Clark, shares this message. To my babies, I have no idea where you two are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you. We couldn't even say anything. What do you even say to that? We just stood in silence for a while. Then we heard a banging on the RV. We jumped and looked outside. It was the lady in the hospital gown, closer than ever. We could see her bluish-gray skin. We could see her hazel eyes. They kind of looked like Amelia's. Muff-bo-bo-bo-bo. She moaned, reaching out for us again. I looked down to the newspaper clipping. It had a picture of the victim on it. I held it up to the window, where she was staring at us. Moo, she said again. My butt. My baby. All this time, she had just wanted her babies. Amelia stepped out of the RV. I was scared at first, but this day couldn't get any crazier, so I followed. Mama, she asked, tears in her eyes. Bobo, she said, reaching her bony hand out once again, but she didn't run. She let her touch her face, as she gently rubbed her hand across her cheek. She did the same to me, but then pointed in the direction of the nearest town. Guh, she said. Go? Why? Amelia asked. Our mother croaked. Dad, Zachary Sr., was he still alive? After all this time? We have 2 hours until Mom and Dad. Amelia cut herself off. They get back. Let's go. Quick. Although we really didn't have any idea how to get to the town, we somehow knew. Like someone was guiding us. We busted into the sheriff's office, probably looking awful. First came the questioning. Then the DNA testing. Then they looked for our parents. Then they arrested my parents. Then the news stories. And the interviews. Then we were flown out in a plane, my first plane ever, to Portland. To meet our dad. We were quite the story. They called my parents the wretches of the woods. They thought of them as evil witches who stole us and hid us deep in the woods. I guess they were right in a way. It was weird seeing them behind bars, serving life sentences, because after all, they raised us for nearly 14 years. But that's where they'll stay. No running, no hiding. There's nowhere to hide in a cell. He burst into tears when he saw us. We didn't. It was weird. He was my dad and all, but was he? I guess I met him when I was like a few hours old, but I just couldn't connect to him. It took a while, but we slowly got used to our new lives. In a house, with a bed in our own rooms, not running from everything or living in the woods. It was peaceful, although most of the time I ended up sneaking into Amelia's room, because after all this time, I still couldn't be alone. One time I got a knock on our window. We both woke up and saw the lady in the hospital gown outside. But she looked happier, less rotten, like she was complete again. Mama, I asked, could she stay? And I could live with the family I crave? Like she read my mind, she shook her head. I have to go. My babies, she said, reaching her hand out to us through the window as she slowly disappeared into the night. We never saw her again after that. But we always knew she was watching us. But this time, we wouldn't run. Fifth story. A trucker's son. My whole life, my father was a trucker. He tote-hauled, shipped, and anything else you can think of. Whenever he could, he'd bring me along with him. It was always fun, sleeping in the back or getting to eat at some random truck stop with him. Quality father and son time. And I got to see the country around us as well. Granted, this wasn't always so happy. Besides breaking down in some random back road or threatened by some hillbillies with a gun, we had some bad experiences. Most of them occurred to our most frequent visiting states. Pennsylvania. The yard my father worked for did business with another one up there. But of course, it meant we had to make long, often aggravating trips on dark country road or winding mountain in the worst of conditions. This one took place on a particularly freezing winter night. It was just before Christmas, and my dad took me on the trip because my older brother was busy at work for the weekend, and he needed someone to help him carry chains and unload a trailer for a client. I won't disclose the exact location of where this took place because, 1, I don't want anyone to try this. 2, you'll probably get shot by hillbillies. And 3, I never knew the exact place. We just called it Redneckville, PA. But anyway, we were driving a brand new white Mack truck with a trailer full of food. Our client didn't run any stores, but he had the money, so we made the crazy run. We packed a few jugs of water and multiple bags of beef jerky with us before we left our home state, NJ. We had already drank 2 jugs and 3 bags of jerky, and by now it was pitch black and snowing like crazy out. We were on a mountainside, driving slowly, so we don't end up driving off the side. Least to say, we were fucked, but we managed to do it. It was about 12:30 a.m., and the snow had gotten too much to handle. We decided that we would pull over and rest the next general store or whatever. Just the comfort of some human life would be perfect, rather than being trapped in the snow in the woods. But as we made our way around the bend, we just caught the glimpse of what looked like a big Rottweiler or pit bull on the road. Understandable. It's not like no one lived on the mountain. A dog is destined to get loose every now and then and wander the road before returning home. But before we could stop, we ran over the large black-haired canine and even heard the loud thud FUD as the truck and trailer ran over its body. My father cursed loudly and immediately pulled the truck to a dead stop in the snow and kicked his door open. I followed. We ran to where we felt like we hit him or her, but we couldn't find anything. No body, no whimpering dog, not even blood. We did find a few large paw prints, but the snow was covering them too quickly. We just know they were heading off road into the snow. We don't know how it survived. We clearly hit it, but it ran off. We were now standing in the snow, freezing our asses off while wearing a pair of black and gray snow jackets. Me wearing a New York Jets hat and him with the FDNY hat. We looked like stereotypical New Yorkers, except we were from NJ, but we spent enough timeline New York. Anyway, there we were, puzzled to add to how a fog could survive getting hit with that big of a truck. Not wanting to die, we just made a break for the truck and cranked the heat before we froze. We started up and made on our merry way again, until an hour later, we had finally found a store of sorts. It had 2 cars in the lot, on the side of the mountain surrounded by trees. It wasn't really a lot, more of a dirt patch. But it worked. We pulled up and parked along the side. It was all closed down, but a guy came out and shouted to my father. He said we could park for the night, but we had to be out by morning. We agreed, bought some more jerky from him, and hit the bed in the back of our sleeper. We slept until 4 a.m. We were woken up by a loud slamming behind us. Had no idea what it was. Just woken up out of a dead sleep in a cold truck in the middle of Redneckville, PA, by what sounded like our locked trailer doors slamming against the side of the trailer. First instinct was that we were getting robbed of our load by some angry hillbillies, or B, forget to lock the doors and so show. The wind and snow blew it open. By the sound of our cargo and chains being rattled around in the back, we figured By the time we both had pulled on barely enough to cloth us in summer and grabbed our guns, who or whatever was in the back had moved on. We got back there, trudging through the now 3 feet of snow in pajama pants and boots, 2 pistols in hand, and pointed out front of us like we were cops. After making sure the dark trailer was empty, I climbed in and looked around. We had a few crates of fruits and vegetables, 2 of which were on their sides, and one had its top ripped off, hooks of meat hanging from chains, and not steaks or chops. I mean full carcasses of deer, pig, cow, and even a few birds. A chain of turkeys were on the ground, and a few chunks of meat missing, almost like a large dog or wolf had eaten and moved on. We had large jugs of milk and crates of cheese in the back. Not much was missing from that save for a spilled jug or 2. But the big missing detail was our cow. In the shipment, We were delivering meat from a big hunting outlet. Sells wild and domestic meats and food. Our client had ordered enough food to feed a family of 25 for a few months, and then some. One of which was a full-grown, freshly butchered bull. They already stripped the legs and such from the body, and it was just that, a torso. They threw the bones in bags for dogs, and the large torso was loaded onto the truck by 5 men. That's how large it was. And the price I don't even want to think about. And somehow, the large beefalo bull body was gone, completely stripped of the chain from where it was hung. Not a trace of it left, save for some gristle and blood on the hook. There were no footprints on the snow around us. Again, this could be due to the amount falling from the sky. My father told me to come around and look at the lock. So I did. It was ripped right off. It had 2 chains come around and close around the handles of the door. It was ripped right at the link. And on the very bottom of the door was a large, scratchy mark, gray from the loss of paint and deep into the metal itself. Claw marks. I was perplexed. Not one animal in this whole area could do that. Mountain lion wouldn't snap a chain in half, dog, and coyote couldn't either, and bears were in hibernation. What in God's holy name could have done it? In all honesty, I was frightened. The next morning, we banged on the door of the general store owner and apologized for not being out yet, and explained our situation. He went pale on mention of it. He told us to come in back and sit down, which we did. He then told us about an urban legend, if you will. He talked about how mutilated half-eaten deer would be found on the side of the road, or mountain lions would be found either half dead or with their throats eaten, and how many hunting dogs would go missing or wind up dead in the woods. He then went on to tell us about the common killer, the hound. He described it as a large black beast who didn't resemble any man-bred dog or wolf. It was big, angry, and no bullet could stop him. He pulled open a drawer and slapped a newspaper on the desk in front of us. It read, "Satan's dog set free. Local law warns not to leave pets tied outside." And under it was a drawing of what looked like a shaggy Rottweiler. The newspaper went on to say about dead dogs and livestock. Even a child went missing near the woods. Sounded like an overreaction to a wolf. Save for the fact there are no wolves in PA, and one wouldn't survive long enough to kill dogs, cougars, and bears. Me and my father were spooked. Didn't automatically believe we were robbed by a demon dog, but we didn't know what would carry a giant bull out into the freezing cold and disappear. We set off as the day lifted, still snowing like crazy, but it was usable. We ended up losing some pay for the spilt or lost meat. We just told the client that a dog or coyote got in the back and must have eaten it or pulled it out, that we forget to lock it. Easier than telling about a dog from hell, if that's even what it was. We headed our way back home the next day and pulled into a truck stop on the bottom of the mountain. There my father picked up a little souvenir and slapped it on our back bumper, proudly with a chuckle as he got back in the truck. I checked it out and laughed before getting in myself. We then drove off back to NJ with new bumper sticker that read, "Beware of Hellhound."